Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traore, known for his modesty, straightforwardness, and principled attitude to justice, is on a commercial flight to the United States to attend an international security conference. He is unaccompanied, wearing simple clothes, and no one recognizes him as a head of state. But a first-class stewardess notices a young black man from economy class standing in the aisle and makes a derogatory comment. And after that, the situation changes. But before that, write down where you are watching us from. Enjoy the show. Under the bright, fluorescent lights of the international terminal at a bustling U.S. airport, the steady hum of conversations and rolling suitcases created a backdrop for a most unlikely scene. Amid the sea of travelers clad in designer labels and crisp business attire, one man moved with a quiet dignity, a man whose very presence could command a nation, yet who today blended seamlessly as an anonymous passenger. This was President Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, known around the world for his modesty, forthrightness, and unwavering commitment to justice. On this flight, returning from an international security conference, Traore had chosen the path of humility. Dressed in simple, unassuming clothing, a plain jacket, a well-worn t-shirt, and comfortable jeans, he appeared as any ordinary traveler might, free of the pomp and circumstance that typically accompanies a head of state. Traore navigated the sprawling concourse with a measured gait. Despite his stature on the global stage, he paid careful attention to the small gestures of everyday kindness. When he encountered an elderly woman struggling with her heavy luggage near a set of automated check-in kiosks, he paused, offered a gentle smile, and promptly stepped forward to help her. His actions were quiet but purposeful, a testament to a character shaped by years of service and disciplined training. In that moment, there was no hint of the presidential office, only a genuine desire to make someone's day a little easier. The onlookers, many too absorbed in their own journeys, regarded his assistance with polite nods and half-smiles, unaware that they were witnessing a leader whose ideals of service and compassion were as deeply embedded in his nature as any official decree. At the departure gate, where announcements echoed through the air and passengers eagerly jostled for a seat in the waiting area, President Traore continued to embody the spirit of unpretentious resilience. He moved with the sort of unassuming confidence earned through years of overcoming significant challenges, both personal and political. As he queued alongside scores of other travelers, his plain, sincere demeanor shielded him from prying eyes. Passengers glanced up only occasionally, none suspecting that the young dark-skinned man in modest attire was actually the president of a sovereign nation. His calm presence was so unremarkable, so perfectly ordinary in appearance, that he blended into the mosaic of humanity moving through the terminal. When it was finally time to board, Traore stepped onto the jet bridge without fanfare or ceremonial pomp. His step was unhurried, his gaze steady, as if he carried within him a profound inner peace. In the throng of passengers lining up to enter the aircraft, he hardly drew any attention. No security team flanked his side. No reporters fanned out in anticipation of a presidential encounter. Today, he was simply another man traveling on a commercial flight, a decision born not of necessity, but of principle, for he firmly believed that true leadership was demonstrated through humility and personal example. Inside the aircraft, the ambience was familiar. The low murmur of conversations, the rustle of magazines being flipped through, and the gentle whir of the air conditioning. Traore strolled calmly down the aisle, scanning the cabin with quiet courtesy. In an act of kindness that might seem commonplace for any conscientious traveler, he paused to help a fellow passenger retrieve a carry-on bag that had slipped from an overhead compartment. With a soft smile and a discreet nod, he placed the bag on the seat in front of its owner. It was a small gesture, a moment of shared humanity amid the transient confines of a flight, but it encapsulated his character. Reserved yet compassionate, humble yet undeniably present. Throughout the boarding process, no one suspected that the unassuming man quietly assisting others, who navigated the corridor with the ease of familiarity and grace, was none other than Ibrahim Traore, the president of Burkina Faso. For him, blending into the crowd was not an act of concealment born out of insecurity. It was a deliberate choice to experience the world beyond the trappings of power and to remind himself, and perhaps the world, that dignity is not measured by titles or the splendor of one's surroundings, but by the quiet strength of one's actions. In that moment, amid the routine bustle of travel, a profound truth was showcased. Leadership can be unobtrusive, genuine, and deeply human. President Traore's unadorned presence on that flight was a living reminder that true strength is not flaunted, but expressed in every considerate deed, every gentle smile, and every act of service toward a fellow human being. As the bustling flight continued its steady progress across the Atlantic, President Ibrahim Traore, disguised in plain, unassuming clothing, moved quietly through the narrow corridors of the aircraft. His face, calm and attentive, betrayed no hint of the authority he carried back home, and his steps were measured with the grace of a man accustomed to duty and discipline. Despite his status as the head of state of Burkina Faso, today he was simply one more traveler, blending effortlessly into the throng of passengers navigating the maze of terminals and cabins. It wasn't long before a small act of kindness beckoned him toward a quiet corner of the plane. Near the entrance to the first-class cabin, he noticed an elderly woman struggling with a rather bulky carry-on bag. The woman, with a faded floral scarf and eyes that spoke of both fatigue and resilience, balanced her luggage awkwardly as she attempted to retrieve it from an overhead compartment. Recognizing her struggle, Traore's innate courtesy emerged. Approaching her with a warm, reassuring smile, he gently offered his assistance. He carefully lifted the bag, his large hands handling it with an unspoken respect, and guided it smoothly into the overhead bin. The elderly woman's face lit up with gratitude as she murmured a sincere thank you, her voice soft and laced with relief. For Traore, this was not merely a courteous gesture. It was an affirmation of the principles of service he had long preached, principles that transcended the trappings of power and rank. With the bag securely stowed, he helped her adjust it so that it would not fall or cause inconvenience during the flight, ensuring her journey would be as comfortable as possible. After seeing the lady safely on her way, Traore continued forward toward the first-class cabin. Though his attire was modest, a simple jacket, t-shirt, and jeans, his every movement was imbued with a quiet dignity that set him apart. As he crossed the threshold into the first-class section, crisp leather seats and an ambience of understated luxury greeted him. The cabin was a world apart from the bustling economy section. Here, soft lighting, polished wood accents, and the hushed tones of refined conversation created an atmosphere of exclusivity and comfort. It was at this critical juncture that a singular, stinging remark disrupted the calm. A well-dressed, impeccably uniformed flight attendant, tasked with overseeing the first-class passengers, glided down the aisle with practiced precision. But her attentiveness, it seemed, extended beyond service. She was quick to scrutinize. Her eyes fell on Traore, a man she presumed to be out of place in this elite sanctuary. Observing him with a mixture of disdain and surprise, she leaned in ever so slightly and, loud enough for those nearby to hear, delivered a scornful comment with a tone that brooked no argument. "This is not your place. Go back to where you came from." Her words, crisp and laced with prejudice, reverberated in the elegant silence of the first-class cabin. A palpable hush fell over the area, a stark interruption to the otherwise gentle murmur of polite conversation. Some passengers exchanged covert glances, their faces straddling the line between shock and suppressed amusement. A few even offered sly, knowing smiles, their eyes betraying the sense of superiority that sometimes arises in exclusive surroundings. Yet, for many others, the comment was a jarring reminder of hidden biases, an echo of prejudices cloaked in the veneer of high-class service. Traore, upon hearing the remark, paused for a long, weighted moment. For a split second, the air filled with the electric charge of unspoken confrontation. However, true to his nature, he did not erupt with anger. Instead, he held his silence and let the gentle dignity he cultivated speak in a different way. Without missing a beat in his journey, he turned slightly, his eyes meeting those of the flight attendant for just a heartbeat, as though to say that his quiet resolve was far greater than her unkind words. There was no retort in his lips, no heated denunciation, only a calm, unwavering expression that reflected years of disciplined restraint and a deep-seated belief in fairness. In that moment, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. The attendant's face, momentarily flushed with indignation, registered the unexpected display of serene composure on the part of the young dark-skinned man. It was clear to all who witnessed the interaction that the comment had struck a nerve, not because it was daring in its audacity, but because it was met with an unyielding calm that rendered it powerless. In the background, murmurs rippled among the passengers, some with soft chuckles at the sheer audacity of the remark, others with empathetic silence, as if collectively acknowledging an injustice long ignored. For Traore, the act of helping an elderly traveler and the subsequent disparaging remark were but parts of a greater narrative. A narrative where true leadership was measured not by the loudness of one's defense, but by the quiet strength with which one responds to adversity. Even as he slowly resumed his path toward his seat, his actions spoke a language that none in that cabin could deny, a language of composed dignity, an embodiment of the principle that true power radiates softly, without the need for provocation. As the flight attendant hurriedly smoothed out her uniform and the passengers resumed their conversations, some now tinted with thoughtful reflection, the moment left an indelible imprint on the hearts and minds of those present. In the delicate interplay between scorn and silence, between expectation and genuine character, a seed of transformation had been planted. The quiet yet potent response of President Ibrahim Traore, hidden beneath his unremarkable exterior, was about to change not only the perception of those around him, but also the very understanding of what it means to lead with dignity. In the instant after the flight attendant's biting remark echoed through the first-class cabin, time itself seemed to momentarily suspend. A heavy silence fell over the luxurious surroundings, an almost tangible pause that rippled through the air. All eyes turned toward the young, dark-skinned traveler, whose calm and measured demeanor had sharply contrasted with the attendant's harsh tone. In that charged moment, the bustling chatter of polite conversation faded into a stillness that was both uncomfortable and profoundly telling. For many in the cabin, the comment had been unexpected, a jolt to the unspoken niceties that governed their daily air travel. Conversations before the remark had been light, marked by casual laughter and the soft murmurs of discreet exchanges among fellow first-class passengers. But now, a collective awareness seemed to emerge from the corners of the cabin, as if everyone was forced to confront a truth they would rather leave unspoken. Some passengers exchanged barely perceptible glances of disbelief while others, confronted by their own hidden biases, recoiled inwardly. An elderly couple, hand in hand, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, each wondering if the remark would leave a lasting stain on what was supposed to be an oasis of refined travel. In one particular row, a discreet murmur stirred as a young woman, seemingly perturbed and yet resolute, adjusted her smartphone with practiced subtlety. Her fingers, though slightly trembling, began to record the unfolding moment. It was as if the current of silence had given rise to an unspoken consensus. This was an event that deserved to be witnessed beyond the transient boundaries of the aircraft. Her intent was not to incite confrontation but to capture, for posterity, an instance when dignity shone through in the face of unsolicited prejudice. The traveler himself, President Ibrahim Traore, responded not with a flash of anger or a heated retort but with an almost imperceptible nod of calm acceptance. He allowed a fleeting moment of gravity to pass over his features before resuming his journey toward his seat. His steady pace and composed smile communicated a silent message that resonated deeply throughout the cabin. To him, respect was not forcibly demanded by angry outbursts or loud proclamations, but simply earned by the unwavering integrity of one's actions. As he moved down the narrow aisle, the subtle shift in the room's energy became unmistakable. The air, once heavy with the remnants of the attendant's insult, now filled with a contemplative quiet. Several passengers, who had initially suppressed their shock with nervous chuckles or half-grins, gradually gave way to a more introspective mood. A gentleman in a tailored suit, glancing up from his newspaper, appeared momentarily pensive as if reflecting on something far greater than an isolated remark. Nearby, a group of young professionals, their conversation previously animated with the trivialities of travel, fell silent. Some even stole glances at Traore with a newfound curiosity, while others appeared visibly disturbed by the casual cruelty of the comment. The profound dignity with which Traore handled the episode was unmistakable. Rather than reacting with indignation that might have disrupted the brazen etiquette of first-class travel, he continued his path with measured grace. His silence, void of bitterness or aggression, seemed to channel all the strength of his convictions. It was a living demonstration of the idea that true leadership, when confronted with unprovoked contempt, doesn't need to roar or retaliate. It simply endures with quiet fortitude. Throughout the cabin, whispers began to flow, gentle, reflective voices questioning norms that many had seldom bothered to examine. "Did you catch that?" someone murmured under their breath. "I can't believe he just let that happen with such calm." Another passenger remarked softly, "It's almost as if he's saying that dignity doesn't need to be defended with anger." And indeed, the subtle power of his silence was such that, in that fraction of a minute, the entire dynamic of the flight changed. Like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples of his behavior reached every corner of the compartment, unsettling long-held prejudices and igniting an inner dialogue among those who were once complacent. At that precise moment, the recording on the young woman's smartphone captured not only the visual tableau, a man walking with quiet dignity in an environment meant to exalt status, but also the collective heartbeat of the cabin as it adjusted to this unexpected spectacle. There was no rush to comment immediately. Rather, a shared, almost sacred silence prevailed. Even the flight attendant, who had delivered the disparaging words with a tone of assured superiority, now paused in her duties. Her eyes briefly glanced at Traore with an expression that mixed uncertainty, discomfort, and perhaps a dawning understanding of the gravity of her error. In that silent stillness, it was evident that something momentous had just occurred. The unprovoked slight had not been met with a tempest of anger or an explosive confrontation. Instead, it had been transformed by a single, impeccable display of self-control. Here was a man who embodied the essence of dignified composure, the kind that, when faced with the need to defend one's worth, does so without descending to the level of the insulter. His silent retort was powerful enough to silence cynicism and awaken in those around him a renewed respect for true human decency. The recording, once captured, hinted at its own fate. Within minutes of the incident, stirred by the quiet yet potent strength of the moment, the video began circulating among passengers' social media, leaving viewers to wonder, who was this man whose response was so quietly revolutionary? This question would soon resonate far beyond the confines of the aircraft, sparking discussions on dignity, leadership, and the transformative power of restraint. As the cabin settled into an atmosphere of reflective calm, every passenger seemed to carry a little more awareness of the subtle, yet radical lesson unfolding in their midst. In that transient passage of time, frozen between a callous remark and an unspoken answer, the truth was laid bare. Dignity, when defended with calm resolve, becomes a timeless testament to what it means to lead by example. In the wake of the flight attendant's dismissive remark, her words still echoing in the hushed first-class cabin, time seemed to decelerate. A heavy, anticipatory silence fell over the sleek, modern surroundings. For a long, measured moment, all eyes in the cabin turned toward President Ibrahim Traore, whose calm, inexpressive face revealed nothing of the storm the remark might have otherwise stirred. Instead of meeting the insult with anger or retort, Traore's eyes remained steady, his poise undisturbed by the unwarranted provocation. Without a hint of haste or indignation, Traore methodically reached into the inner pocket of his well-fitting, unassuming jacket. Every movement was deliberate and imbued with an air of quiet dignity, a stark contrast to the charged venom of the stewardess's comment. As he drew his hand slowly from his pocket, a subtle yet significant gaze swept across the cabin. The passengers, previously caught off guard by the brazen snarl, now leaned in, caught between curiosity and a dawning realization that they were witnessing something unexpected. In that suspended moment, Traore produced a neatly folded boarding pass from his palm. The boarding pass, printed in precise, unadorned lettering, bore the unmistakable emblem of an international airline. However, its details spoke louder than any ostentatious display of wealth could. Here was a first-class ticket. With practiced serenity, he unfolded it just enough so that, with a few measured gestures, He showed it to everyone within view. The text and numbers were crisp and unambiguous. His seat, his boarding reference, and a clear indication that he was indeed scheduled to travel in first class. A ripple of astonishment passed through the cabin. What had begun as a demeaning comment directed at an apparently out-of-place traveler was now redefined by the revelation of his boarding pass. Whispers arose like gentle currents in a previously still room. "He's in first class?" murmured one passenger, while another, leaning discreetly toward a neighbor, said, "I didn't expect that at all." The initial smug glances and suppressed chuckles that had accompanied the stewardess's barb faded quickly into a collective silence of disbelief. In that singular moment, the dynamics within the cabin subtly shifted. The scorn of the remark was met with the undeniable truth of meticulous preparation and proper protocol. The flight attendant, caught in the sudden shift of attention, faltered in her duties. Her confident stride halted momentarily as she registered the boarding pass displayed so openly by the traveler. A flush of color crept up her cheeks, an amalgam of embarrassment and the sting of reproof, as she realized that her slip of disdain had been outdone by the impeccable presentation of quiet authority. Her eyes darted nervously from Traore's composed face to the boarding pass in his hand and back again, as if searching for an error that was not there. For Traore, this small yet transformative moment was emblematic of his lifelong conviction. Dignity is not about titles and grandeur, but about behavior and character. Rather than raising his voice or sulking in silence, he allowed the simplicity of his demonstration, a neatly printed ticket, unfurled with deliberate grace, to speak volumes about his principles. His calm insistence on showing his boarding pass was not a challenge to the established order but an affirmation that his presence in first class was earned long before any flight attendant's bias had a chance to cast judgment. The ambience in the cabin, once stiff with expectation and strained laughter from the earlier remark, now softened into a collaborative silence. Eyes, once narrowed in suspicion or amusement at the perceived misalignment, widened with a dawning respect. Conversations resumed, but now in hushed tones that carried a trace of reverence, for the unassuming traveler whose quiet act had upended presumptions and exposed the fragility of prejudice hidden behind smiles and uniformed authority. In that lingering silence, the president's actions had achieved what a million words might not. They transformed a moment of indignity into one of understated victory. The boarding pass gleamed as a symbol, the physical proof that he belonged in that realm, not through ostentation, but through legitimacy and propriety. Passengers exchanged glances. Some even recorded the unfolding scene on their smartphones, their fingers trembling with both admiration and the awareness that they were witnessing true leadership in its most unadorned form. A murmur began to circulate in the cabin as someone remarked quietly, "He just proved that dignity speaks louder than insults." And with that, the room settled into a reflective calm, each individual silently reconsidering their own preconceptions about status, entitlement, and the nature of respect. At that juncture, the flight attendant herself, now red-faced and subdued, murmured a hesitant apology. A few garbled words that barely escaped in the din of the renewed quiet. But President Traore merely offered a placid, almost compassionate smile, his eyes meeting hers with a softness that spoke of forgiveness rather than scorn. "I am not offended," he said in a level, warm tone that carried both wisdom and a quiet admonition. "I only regret that we still judge by appearance rather than by actions." His words, framed by the steady cadence of his voice, seemed to echo softly around the cabin, leaving an indelible mark on everyone present. In that transformative moment, the truth of his identity remained hidden from those who might yet draw conclusions, but the power of his response had already begun to alter hearts that day. His calm, measured rebuttal had transmuted a scene of potential conflict into one of profound reflection, a moment when pride and prejudice, so often tightly interwoven, were gently unraveled by the simple act of a first-class boarding pass held with quiet dignity. Just as the gentle display of President Traore's boarding pass had shifted the energy in the cabin from derision to quiet astonishment, an unexpected murmur began to rise from the back of the first-class section. While most passengers had been absorbed in the powerful silence following his dignified rebuttal, one observant traveler, a middle-aged man in a pressed suit, his eyes keen and reflective, suddenly leaned forward as if a long-held secret had been unlocked. In a soft but audible tone that cut through the reverent quiet, he murmured, Could it be?" His words, though hushed, rapidly set off a chain reaction. Within moments, murmurs swelled into a collective realization. Faces, previously sunk into contemplation or wrapped in polite indifference, were now lifting in surprise. The suited man, repositioning himself so that his view of Traore was unobstructed, discreetly whispered to a companion seated beside him, "I know that face. He's not just any traveler. He is President Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso." The gravity of the revelation spread quietly at first, like ripples in a still lake. A few passengers exchanged astonished glances, their eyes widening with disbelief as they slowly connected the dots between the unassuming traveler's calm demeanor and the news reports they had only once heard, if at all, about a leader whose humility was renowned even on the world stage. The revelation turned the atmosphere in the cabin from one of reflective silence into a charged, yet respectful, buzz. Some passengers, emboldened by the news, began touching their smartphones to check live headlines or to search for confirmation of the identity that had now been unveiled before their eyes. A hushed cacophony of exclamations, half-whispered and tinged with wonder, filled the space. "He's really the president. How can someone so humble be a head of state? I never imagined such dignity could be found on a commercial flight." The realization spread like wildfire. Eyes that had once scanned Traore with an appraisal reserved for the everyday traveler now glistened with a mixture of awe and newfound respect. A woman across the aisle, who had earlier quietly admired the unsolicited kindness he'd shown the elderly passenger, leaned closer to her neighbor and said, "He exemplifies what true leadership is. His demeanor, his quiet strength. It's inspiring." Others nodded in agreement, their previous preconceptions melting away as they witnessed firsthand that leadership did not always sport an ostentatious air, but could instead reside in the subtle power of measured action. Meanwhile, the flight attendant, already red-faced from her earlier comment, appeared visibly flustered as the news confirmed through whispered discussions. Her earlier statement, intended to dismiss Traore as an ordinary economy-class traveler, was now tinged with irony and regret. Behind the counter of the service desk, she exchanged a quick, apologetic glance with a senior crew member, her earlier confidence dissolving under the weight of collective recognition. The ripple of recognition did not stop at idle gossip. One by one, passengers began to offer gestures of acknowledgement, to smile, nod, or even whisper words of admiration as they realized the man before them was indeed a person who wore his leadership quietly, far removed from the grandiosity often associated with presidents. From a young professional in the corner, who typed out a discreet message on social media reading, "True leadership is measured in quiet dignity," to a senior traveler who mused softly, "I've seen many leaders in my lifetime, yet none with such humble power." The cabin soon became a forum for an impromptu celebration of unassuming greatness. And so, as the unintentional unveiling of his identity rippled through the cabin, the atmosphere transformed yet again. The initial shock gave way to a collective pause, a moment where every soul aboard the flight reconsidered its understanding of true authority. The conversation, once centered on status and privilege, shifted toward pondering qualities that define genuine strength. In the midst of whispered comments and furtive glances turned truthful, a quiet consensus began to crystallize. Here was a leader who carried the weight of a nation, not with bluster or ostentation, but with unwavering calm and deeply rooted dignity. Even as some passengers continued to exchange words in hushed tones, the scene maintained an unexpected air of serenity. President Traore, still unperturbed by the swirling recognition, resumed his quiet journey toward his seat. There was no flash of pomp or fanfare, only the subtle, unyielding confidence that a man of character possesses. And with each step he took down the aisle, the collective respect within the cabin grew a little stronger. The very act of being recognized for who he was resonated as a powerful reminder that true leadership is revealed not in the glare of the spotlight, but in moments of humble, dignified presence. In that moment of public recognition, it became clear that his quiet demonstration had not only transformed an insult into an opportunity for reflection, but had also ignited admiration that would soon ripple far beyond the confines of that single flight. The wave of surprise, now melded with respect, was but a prelude to the lasting impact that his silent strength would have on everyone who bore witness. As the murmurs of recognition and reverence rippled through the first-class cabin, the atmosphere shifted once again when the flight attendant, whose earlier remark had ignited the spark of silent defiance, slowly gathered the courage to address the growing tension. Clearly shaken and now deeply aware of the eyes upon her, she stepped forward from behind the service cart with tentative steps. Her voice, when it emerged, was subdued and tinged with remorse. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention for a moment," she began, pausing to steady herself as the room softened into expectant silence. I wish to apologize for my earlier comment. It was careless, and it did not reflect the values of respect that we all deserve." For a long moment, the cabin was hushed and attentive. The flight attendant's words hung in the air like fragile glass, and passengers leaned in, some recording the moment discreetly on their smartphones, others simply absorbing the unexpected display of vulnerability. Her admission was sincere, her eyes lowered in contrition as she continued. "I realize now that my assumptions were wrong. I deeply regret that I allowed prejudice to slip through in the way I spoke, and I am truly sorry." The apology came not as a public spectacle of self-justification, but as a quiet, heartfelt acknowledgement of a mistake made in haste. In response, President Ibrahim Traore, standing with a calm composure that had been his hallmark all flight, stepped slightly forward, his expression remaining as serene as ever. With a gentle, measured tone that resonated with quiet authority, he addressed the entire cabin. "I am not offended by your words. I understand that sometimes unintentional mistakes are made in a moment of misjudgment. However, what saddens me is that in this day and age, we still find ourselves judging one another by the color of our skin rather than by the content of our actions." His soft-spoken declaration was imbued with a wisdom that transcended any personal slight. There was no accusation, no dismissiveness, just a clear articulation of his core belief in dignity and equality. A ripple passed through the cabin. Passengers, who until now had been silently processing the events, felt the weight of his words settle deep within the space. Some exchanged glances of heartfelt approval. Others, who had once harbored unspoken biases, began to reflect anew on their own assumptions. Even the flight attendant's eyes shimmered, mixed with regret and a dawning understanding of the lesson momentarily offered through his unyielding calm. Within minutes, several fellow travelers discreetly shared his statement among one another, repeating softly, he said, "I only regret that we still judge by color rather than by our actions." The phrase quickly caught on, and soon whispers of this powerful message began to spread throughout the cabin. Other passengers nodded, a few murmuring that his words epitomized the true nature of leadership, a leadership not brash or demonstrative, but gentle, resilient, and rooted in unwavering dignity. As the aircraft continued its comfortable journey across the Atlantic, a renewed sense of respect and introspection permeated the first-class cabin. Some passengers, moved to tears by the contrast between an unflinching apology and a dignified response, discreetly recorded the entire exchange. Others, capturing the moment in their hearts rather than on their devices, turned inward to consider what it meant to treat every human being with the respect they inherently deserve. When the flight finally landed, the video of this exchange, spanning the flight attendant's remorseful apology and President Traore's quiet correction, began making its way across digital platforms. Within hours, news outlets reported on the incident with headlines praising a president's poised response and dignity in the face of prejudice. Social media users shared the video widely, lauding his statement as a timeless reminder that true leadership is measured not by titles or flamboyance, but by the modesty with which one defends one's principles. In countless interviews that followed, commentators, human rights advocates, and even fellow world leaders echoed his words. "I only regret that we still judge by color rather than by our actions," became a rallying cry, a timeless message of equality and respect. His response served not merely as a rebuttal to an isolated act of meanness, but as an emblematic declaration that dignity is independent of outward appearances. Through that single, serene interaction, President Ibrahim Traore had once again shown that real power lies in a composed heart and an unyielding adherence to one's values. His quiet vindication, rendered through a respectful yet pointed rebuttal, transcended the confines of a single flight, reminding everyone present that the strength of one's character can indeed transform moments of potential conflict into occasions for collective reflection and change. In the hours and days that followed, the video of President Ibrahim Traore's serene response spread like wildfire across the digital landscape. What had begun as a quiet act aboard a commercial flight soon evolved into a global conversation about dignity, respect, and the true meaning of leadership. Tweets, Facebook posts, and Instagram stories reposted the video clip, often captioned with reflections that praised his composure and timeless wisdom. The recording, capturing the precise moment when a demeaning comment was met with grace and an unfaltering yet gentle rebuttal, resonated with millions around the world. News outlets, both traditional and online, quickly picked up on the story. Headlines appeared in outlets from local newspapers in the United States to international media. President Traore's quiet retort shakes up prejudice on a flight, and dignity over disdain, a president's lesson in leadership. Analysts and opinion writers lauded his response as a powerful counterpoint to a world where loud proclamations and aggressive posturing often dominate political discourse. Experts emphasized that his measured reply, "I am not offended. I only regret that we still judge by color, rather than by our actions," was not just a dismissal of an insult, but an emblem of a leadership style that prioritizes substance over appearance. Across digital platforms, people from all walks of life began sharing their own stories of facing prejudice and intolerance, inspired by Traore's example. Some reflected on times when they, too, had encountered unkind words or unjust assumptions, reminding the world that discrimination often lurks in unexpected corners. Others noted that his calm, measured response provided a template for how to handle personal affronts. Not with anger or retaliation, but with quiet strength, self-respect, and a commitment to view people through the lens of their actions, rather than by superficial markers. In one particularly moving thread on a popular social media site, a user wrote, "He showed us that leadership is not about shouting over others or forcing your power on them. It's about being so firmly rooted in your principles that a single act of quiet dignity can silence prejudice. I've seen so many leaders who scream to be heard, but here is one who lets his character do the talking." Influencers and thought leaders soon quoted his words, and his message penetrated beyond the online sphere. Academics and activists heralded his response as a turning point, a small yet potent reminder that even those in positions of great power must remain humble, accountable, and empathetic. The conversation wasn't limited solely to social media. At international conferences, political commentators and human rights advocates began citing the incident as proof that true leadership is measured not by the flamboyance of a title or a pompous presence, but by the quiet but resilient manner in which one stands up to injustice. Several prominent leaders, in interviews addressed to global audiences, remarked on the symbolism of a president who, in his ordinary clothes and with a simple first-class boarding pass, could inspire a movement against prejudice. His refusal to react with anger, his willingness to accept an apology from a remorseful flight attendant with a compassionate smile, and his ability to convert a painful moment into an enduring lesson, all underscored the transformative power of calm determination. Within the flight cabin itself, the earlier atmosphere of muted shock and cautious curiosity had given way to murmurs of approval and respectful discussion. Fellow passengers recounted the incident to family members and friends, underscoring that the strength of character they had witnessed was something rare and deeply needed in today's world. An elderly gentleman later remarked to a young woman seated beside him, "I may have seen many celebrities and politicians in my time, but never have I witnessed a true leader who commands respect without ever raising his voice. Today, our world has been reminded that dignity speaks louder than any insult." The ripple effect of that solitary moment aboard the flight reached far beyond the confines of a buzzing carriage. It launched dialogues about judging individuals by their actions rather than by the color of their skin, fostering a renewed call for introspection among audiences globally. In interviews and public speeches, President Traore's message was repeatedly distilled into a simple truth. Real leadership does not demand recognition through ostentatious displays of power. It is quietly earned through actions that honor the inherent worth of every individual. In the end, as the video continued to amass views and accolades, the overarching narrative emerged clearly. He could have been unrecognized, but his actions were unmistakable. His dignified response reshaped perceptions, not only proving that leadership does not require a title or extravagant posturing, but also affirming that true strength appears in the unassuming moments when one stands resolute against injustice. He can be unrecognized, but dignity never needs a title. Subscribe to not miss more stories where true power is the quiet response to humiliation.